Welcome to A Changed Life. This is a podcast about choosing differently, how you think, how you relate, and how you lead yourself. Here we focus on the inner shifts that create real momentum and open up what's possible next. This is part 3 of a 3-part series. So if you're just landing here now, I want to encourage you to go backwards before you go forward, because this episode really relies on the 2 prior to this one. In episode 25, you don't need all the information to heal. I told you about my own D-Day. What I remembered was the wind and a sweatshirt, what I was wearing, but what I don't remember is basically the entire timeline after that. And I made the case that the gaps in your own memory aren't a character flaw. That is a flooded nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems do. In the next episode, episode 26, the double life brain, I walk through what's happening inside the brain of the person who's done the deceiving. Why the story shifts, why new pieces of information surface months later, and why this isn't automatically proof of a lie. Today, we finish it with episode 27, because if you've listened to those 2, there's a question that's sitting there that I haven't answered yet that I'm going to answer today. If the way disclosure is done right now is broken, and I believe that it is, then what should happen instead? And if you already had yours, if that day is behind you and you're still carrying questions that never got answered, stay with me. This is for you too, maybe for you most of all. So I want to be really clear about what I'm doing with this. I'm not building a funnel here, meaning I'm not suggesting that you reach out to me. This is my way of getting people to want to do this type of disclosure with me. What I'm actually offering you and suggesting is that you take this to your own therapist or your own coach, whoever it is that you're working with, and just ask, can we look at this? Ask them to listen to the 3 episodes and ask them if they're open to doing things differently. That is the point of today. So welcome back to A Changed Life podcast. I am Elise Craft. If you've been through disclosure or you know that one is coming, think about what you were actually told to expect going through this process and what's on the other side. For most of the people that I've worked with, it looks something like this. Each of you has your own practitioner. It's either a trained coach or a trained therapist in disclosure. Often there's a third person supporting the 2 of you as a couple. So you're not doing this alone, and that's really, really important. You work with a practitioner to get ready, and the getting ready is different for both people. That prep oftentimes is much more than just talking. It's getting your body and your nervous system ready, learning what happens to you specifically under that kind of stress, and what can bring you back to baseline. It's also preparing the person that is going to actually be doing the disclosure to deliver this. So on one side, on the side of the person that has been lied to and deceived, they're in the receiving mode. And the person that has done the deceiving is in the delivery mode. Both of these have their own skills. And because most people have never gone through anything like this before in their life, it is really valuable to prepare yourself. Then comes the timeline, right? He builds out a timeline. And I'm saying he because in most of the cases, it is the man that has been the unfaithful or lying, cheating, deceiving, and it is the woman that has been harmed. So he's building out this timeline. Your questions get written and submitted and reviewed. sometimes even edited before they're asked. So the two coaches will work together, the coach and the therapist will work together, and they're going back and forth and they're coming up with what is actually going to be part of the disclosure. So again, one side is receiving and the other one is delivering. And on that date, the four of you, so oftentimes the couples coach or the couples therapist is not in the room. It will be for this conversation, it'll be the woman and her coach or therapist, and it'll be the man and his coach and therapist. So you've got four of you in the room, and it's either together or on Zoom, and it is many, 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 many hours. I used to believe in that. I actually supported it inside the industry before I really started paying close attention to what it was doing to the people that had lived through it. And to be fair here, because that matters, the preparation part is often genuinely really good work. Real skills are learned. There's real care, real practitioners who really, really want this to go well for you, which is exactly what makes the next part so hard to look at. Because with all the scaffolding in place, 3 practitioners, months of preparation, a reviewed timeline, vetted questions, 2 nervous systems that have been trained or readied for what's about to happen, almost no one stops to ask the one question that decides everything. Does any of that actually match what this one day is about to ask of it? Because that day isn't an hour, it isn't 2. I've seen up to 8 hours straight. Yes, sure, a few breaks, but 8 hours of disclosure. Sit with how strange that is for a moment. There's months and months and months of preparation in the front end. And oftentimes, now this isn't always the case, but oftentimes there's I'm going to say in air quotes, a rush to get to disclosure before there's been enough learning, understanding oneself, assimilating all that you've learned about yourself to understand what the patterns were, what the early traumas were, just all of it. They're rushed to do this disclosure as though it's going to be this big line in the sand that's going to change everything. And the middle part, right? So then now that you've decided that you're going to do disclosure, you're going to spend the next couple of months, sometimes it's 6-8 weeks, sometimes it's 4, 5, 6 months to get ready. And then we land on the day that you sit in a room, and whether you are prepared for this or not, I think it is virtually humanly impossible for the nervous system to not get flooded with all this information as you absorb the worst news of its life. Your nervous system and you are absorbing all of this for the better part of a workday, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. I've called this a lot of things over the years. Today I'm going to call it exactly what I think of it, and I think of it as barbaric. Run it through a simple filter. Is this helpful? Is this hurtful? Is this harmful? Is this healing? Ask anyone who has sat through one of those days and then had almost no processing afterwards, no place to land. I think most people would land somewhere between hurtful and harmful. And well, we made it through, we did our disclosure as though there's some badge of accomplishment for having done disclosure. But I think it's so important to really ask the question, has this industry built a very elaborate, very expensive solution that actually misses the mark? And I'm not asking that to be, I don't know, provocative. I'm asking it because everything we know about the brain says a flooded nervous system stops taking in information relatively early. And everything about this format assumes it keeps taking in all this information for the many, many, many hours. So both of those things cannot be true. One of them is wrong, and it is not the brain. So, it's not the marathon is the problem that you can see from the outside, but there's a second one underneath it, and it probably matters more. It isn't just how long the day is, because you might be listening and go, well, hours was three hours, or hours was 4 hours. Wow, hours was half the amount of time that she's talking about. It's more than that. It's what's being asked for inside of it. Many disclosures, and dare I say, most disclosures are very forensic. How many times, what acts, what dates, what was said. It's a catalog of information. So try something with me right now, okay? Just take the last 2 weeks of your life, not 2 years, not 20 years, just the last 2 weeks. And now account for it in sequence. What did you do each day? In what exact order? Who did you talk to? What did you talk about? What did you see? What were you feeling while you were doing it? That's hard. I would venture to say it's impossible. And that's just 14 days where you weren't hiding anything. Now stretch that. 5 months, 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30, 40 years. And add that half of it was happening while actively covering, lying, and managing two realities at the same time. That's what a forensic disclosure asks for. A perfect file that the brain actually never made in the first place. And I cover this idea in episode 26, which is why it's so important to listen to that. So here's the trap. The model asks for the one thing the brain stores badly, which is logistics, and mostly skips the thing that the brain stores deeply, which is the emotional architecture of the double life. The turmoil, the plotting, the covering, the split life, the moment it started, who they became to keep it going, how they held you in their mind while they did it. That they remember. They lived it constantly under high emotion and high stress across both lives. That's encoded. And here's the part that gets me every time. That thing that they actually can remember is the exact thing that you need most, not the choreography. The answer to who you were while you were doing this, and where was I in your mind? Forensic disclosure asks for what the brain can't reliably give and skips what it can. Everything I'm about to describe is going to reverse that. So I want to tell you about a client couple that I worked with that went through disclosure with another company. I don't do disclosure in the way that disclosure is done in the industry, and that's the most popular and often asked for process. And they spent 8 hours in a disclosure that was given in buckets of information. So what I mean by that is all the porn acting out, all the strip club acting out, all the at work acting out, all the around town acting out, these buckets. And that just doesn't work. What I mean by that is what I have found, and I have felt this way, and I know that many, many other women feel this way. They're trying to overlay the life that they lived with the life that you were living to try to make it all make sense in a timeline. So that doesn't happen when there's this buckets of information, and the most important piece that's left out is the emotional architecture that was happening at the time. So here's what I think should happen instead. I call it disclosure in chapters, and the name is the whole explanation. The truth still comes out, as much of it that can be remembered. It just doesn't arrive in one insanely long, pressure-filled, anxiety-filled day. It gets told in chapters in order over time. So there's 3 parts to this. Part 1 is the readiness. Part 2 is the telling of it. And part 3 is the 90-day regroup after it. So start to finish, this would generally take about 4 to 5 months, not 7 hours, months, which is roughly how long real repair takes anyway. And I'm not saying that in the matter of 3 or 4 or 5 months that you're going to be, quote unquote, healed and all better and you could just move on. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that the rumination, the being hyper vigilant, feeling like a detective, questioning your whole life with the person, you can really start to get to some really deeply rooted, grounded resolution. So I'm going to break this down, each one. The readiness is still that regulation work, and it's done individually because we all have our own unique nervous system. And it is very challenging to stay present with hard information instead of flooding or shutting down and checking out. But readiness here isn't building towards one massive day. It's building toward being able to show up again and again for shorter, structured conversations. That's a completely different target. You're not training someone to survive 8 hours. You're helping them get steady enough for 90 minutes at a time, spread out, with room to actually process in between, instead of just endure straight through. So let's think about this for a second. When typical disclosure is done now, it is virtually impossible to remember everything that was said. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes you're given a document, you can read it. But it's very different than catching the nuances about what were said during the conversation. So there's a lot that gets missed, a lot that you can't remember after disclosure because either, and this is very common, your brain just checks out for a little bit. It kind of goes offline and then it comes back online and it goes offline, and you're really trying desperately to be with yourself and stay with yourself, but it is really hard. What I'm proposing is a process where the unfolding happens over a period of time, so that you can regulate over a period of time, that you could take information or a chapter on board, let it sit, let it assimilate, let it metabolize, and you can come back into a session and do some deeper processing. So the telling, which is the second part, the story gets told in chapters in chronological order with a third party, with your coach or your therapist in the room. Each chapter covers a period of time. What was happening in his life then? What was happening between the two of you then? What was happening in the family then? Where was his head at? What was he doing? And underneath that, who was he being while he did it? Chronological matters more than people realize. When it comes in buckets, all the porn and all the acting out and then all the fantasy, the betrayed partner is left holding a pile of disconnected pieces with no way to lay them over her own memory of those same years, like I mentioned earlier with the couple that I mentioned. Chronological order lets her put his story next to hers. That's the overlay. That's the split screen. That's what makes life legible again. And I want to name the obvious objection because I'm guessing somebody's already thinking it. Doesn't spreading it out just give him more time to hide? I'd actually argue the opposite. Reciting logistics is exactly where someone hides. You can hand over dates and numbers and never once tell the truth about who you actually were. Narrating the split, the plotting, the person that you became, that takes actual ownership. It is a much harder standard, not a softer one. And someone can fail it badly by minimizing, by going vague, by refusing the emotional truth. So there's still a real test here. It's just a test. The honest can pass and the dishonest can't, which is exactly backwards from how it works now. Then there comes the 90-day regroup. This is the piece almost no one builds in, and it's the one that I would fight the hardest for. Disclosure is not one day and done. New pieces surface. And in episode 26, I go into why that is. A splintered brain does not hand over a complete file on demand, even if they've been given months to work on it. Things are going to come loose later, sometimes in the middle of a meeting that they're sitting in, or a share that somebody else is sharing, or a song that comes on, or a place that they go, or a smell that they smell, and something drops in. Right now, when that happens, it lands as a fresh betrayal, and things start to detonate all over again. So there's a structured window built into the front end. There's an expectation that there's going to be potentially a continued unfolding. And truth be told, that unfolding could happen 6 months, 2 years, 5 years later. But the upside is that you've worked together and individually to be able to emotionally hold new information, and you've worked together to learn how to repair in a truly connected way. So in the process that I'm suggesting here, disclosure in chapters, for the next 90 days, 3 months, there's a known way to bring new information forward. It's normal, it is scheduled, it is expected, there's an allowance for it. 2 things that does. It stops him from swallowing something because he's scared of what telling you will cost. And it stops you from being blindsided by a system that never planned for the truth to keep unfolding. And I think we've all had a situation where we've remembered something after the fact. That's not that unusual. So I want to say something about what I'm going to refer to as a risky season. And it's not when you probably think. It usually isn't right after everything falls apart because you're expecting things to be awful. It could be a year out, or 2 years out, or 3 years out, 4 years out, when things actually start to feel really good again. He might have held it together during the crisis because he was scared. And when the fear lifts, whatever the fear was propping up can come down with it. which means the dangerous stretch is exactly the stretch where everyone stops paying attention. And that's partly what the regroup is for. So I also want to say this. It's important to always be working on your relationship, to always do check-ins with each other, to always work on how you repair, how you connect, how often you connect, how often you repair. It doesn't mean that you always need to be in couples coaching or couples therapy. The goal is that you learn enough skills and enough regulation individually and as a couple that over time you can co-regulate. You can help each other, you can support each other, and you could do a lot of this work on your own. That's the goal, I would think. And I think oftentimes a lot of couples get into these really horrible situations, and it's not always infidelity and cheating and lying. It could be other things. And what I mean by that is it may not always be about another person. Maybe it's about gambling or spending too much money or having something awful happen at work or in your career, and you don't reach for your partner, and that becomes part of a secret life. So it's not always the infidelity. Why check-ins are so valuable with couples, whether you do a daily check-in or you do it a few times a week, but that you have something structured in your relationship so that you have a place to bring the hard stuff. So I want to talk to the person who has questions that will not stop running. You replay a trip. You go over holidays in your head. It could be just a casual conversation that happened in the kitchen. You want to know, what was he actually doing that week? What was he thinking when he said that thing? Whether that memory you love so much was real, or whether you're the only one that was actually having that experience. And a lot of you don't ask. Sadly, you turn on yourself instead. You decide that you're being insecure or needy or pathetic or obsessive or stuck. Someone might have even suggested that to you. Maybe he has. Maybe other people that support you have. I want to say this really plainly, really clearly. Your brain is trying to close a gap, and that is not dysfunction. That is a brain doing its actual job, which is making a coherent story out of your own life. It cannot file something that still has a hole in it, so it keeps handing it back to you, and that's what the loop is. You are allowed to ask again and again, more than once, because repetition is not a character flaw, and it isn't proof that you're not healing. And I'll say that on the other side too, because unlimited questions, constantly asking questions with no shape to them, can turn life into a lifetime of interrogating instead of living. That's why this belongs in a container with someone who can hold the space with you, rather than at 11 o'clock at night when something pops into your head. The structure isn't there to limit you. It's there so the asking has somewhere to actually land. What this is building toward is not you being okay with what happened. It's you having a version of the story that you can actually carry, one with enough coherence to hold and walk with, whether you walk forward together or apart. Now, here's the part I actually care most about. And before I go there, I want to talk directly to the person or people who have already had their disclosure. You did the thing, you sat through the day, and you walked out of it with more unspoken questions than answers that ever led to any real clarity. So I want to encourage you to explore disclosure in chapters, not as a do-over, but as the thing that was actually missing all along, because you deserve it. A relationship of any kind that has an unspoken environment in it will not give you the safety that you deserve. When there's that much left unexplained, it doesn't just disappear. It lives silently between you. It sits in the room during dinner with you. It shows up in a pause before you ask something and then you decide not to. You did not come this far to just come this far. Living with unanswered questions is its own kind of emotional torment, and nobody deserves that. Not you, and honestly, not him either. So whether your disclosure is ahead of you or years behind you, this next part is the same. And again, I'm not telling you to come to me. That's not what this episode is about. If you're already working with someone, a therapist, a coach, a CSAT, someone that you trust, someone that knows your stories already, take this to them. You are allowed to participate in your own process instead of just being a passenger. It is so valuable to advocate for yourself. So it could sound something like this. I've been thinking about disclosure that we had planned, or I'm thinking about disclosure that we had. And I want to ask you about the format. Instead of one long day, could we do it in chapters over time in chronological order, with room to process in between? And could we build in a regroup window for whatever surfaces afterwards? So if you've had yours already, that probably wouldn't make much sense, right? It might sound like this. We did the disclosure and I'm still carrying questions that never got answered. I don't want to redo it. I want to go back through it in chapters in order so I can actually lay his story over mine. Could we build that together? That's it. That's the ask. Some things worth listening for in what comes back. A good professional will engage with the question. It's not to say that they may not push back and they may have real reasons, and that's a conversation that's worth having because they know you and they know your situation and I don't. What should give you pause is if the answer is essentially, that's just not how it's done, because that's tradition. That's the same old, that's the system. That's not a rationale. And one more note, since it comes up constantly. If a polygraph is part of your process, understand what it measures. It measures psychological arousal during specific questions. It doesn't produce a complete accounting, and it can't tell you the difference between someone lying and someone who genuinely cannot retrieve something. I'm not telling you to refuse one. I'm telling you to give it a job that it's meant to do, not to hand it a job that it's never built to do. And if you don't have a person, you're not working with anyone, you've heard about disclosure, you're curious about it, you're scared of it, you don't know if there's real value to it, you want to have a conversation, you know that you can always reach out. But I would rather you take this to whoever you're already working with. I know it is very exhausting and very draining to keep repeating your stories. And that's why I'm really encouraging you to take it to whoever you're working with. One thing I have to say clearly, because it protects everything else, everything in this episode assumes that someone, the person who did the harm, is actually showing up, doing the work, telling the truth as it becomes available to them, including the parts that make them look really, really, really bad. If someone is knowingly lying, hedging, disclosing exactly as much as they think you already know and know more, that's not what this conversation's about. That person still has a splintered brain and is still deep in it, because managing another person's reality is its own kind of acting out. That is integrity abuse. Nothing here is a shelter for that. This is for the ones legitimately showing up, consistently doing the work, where you still can't find your way back to anything that resembles true, deep trust. So that's the series. Episode 25, Your Brain Didn't Record Everything and You Don't Need Every Piece of Information to Heal. Episode 26, His Brain Didn't Record Everything Either. And the story shifting isn't automatically a lie. It's about the splintered brain. And today, if that's true of both of you, then the model we've all been handed asks for something neither the brain can produce in a format neither the nervous system can hold. So disclosure in chapters. Part 1, readiness, so you can show up steadily. Part 2, the telling in order over time. And Part 3, the regroup, because the truth doesn't finish arriving on a schedule that was set. You don't need me to do this. You need to know it's a thing that you can ask and advocate for. I do have an ask, though. If this series has been helpful to you, send it to one person who needs it. That's how we get the word out. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next episode. If something in today's episode resonated with you, you'll find a link in the show notes to book a free consultation call. Or you can visit elisecraft.com to explore my programs and free resources. Nothing changes until you do. And when you do, everything does. This is a changed life. Not all at once, but for good.